It's been a while. In fact, I think it's been like, I don't know, 3, 4 months. But I'm back with an episode of the Notorious pod. And I thought I would do something fun, and I think by the time this published, it will either be after the new year or potentially, like right before the new year. And as some of you know, I do this predictions post every year. And this year, I actually had the interesting pleasure, because that's really what it is, of interacting with someone on Twitter about predictions. And I thought, what better way of kind of either closing out this year or kicking off the new year than to bring him on and discuss our predictions. And it turns out he also made predictions. So I want to bring on Brian Adams of Hooquest right now. Hello, Brian. How are you?
Very good.
Good to see you. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people usually talk about my books. I think I prefer your books and your bookshelves. It's much neater.
Yeah, yeah. It's too deep as well. There's books
nice.
Behind books.
Nice. All right. So I don't know how many people know you. If kind of in the industry. You're a realtor in Killeen, Texas.
Yes.
Right? And I think I said that right. Killeen, right? Not yep. Killeen or Killeen. Nope. So tell us a little bit about yourself and when you got in and how this all began.
Yeah. So my real estate journey began at West Point, actually. My econ teacher, who was a military officer, mentioned how every time he PCS'd, he would buy a house and turn it into a rental. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that was brilliant.
Right.
When I got in the Army, I bought a house five houses in 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And I just enjoyed it so much that when my 5 years were up, I got out and started doing the real estate thing.
Oh, wow. Good for you.
They're in Killeen, of course, military community, Fort Hood there. And
sure.
Then it was 2019, I ended up joining Zillow Offers in their pricing department. And as we mentioned, I'm technically still with them for another just under a week.
All right, so we'll have to be careful when we address that section if it comes up, and there's a chance it might. So, all right,
we'll just have full disclosure. I do have investments in Zillow and CoStar and Fannie Mae. I think those are my only real estate related investments.
All right,
so
and I should
make.
That's right, and I should note that I'm long open door, as well, for anybody who cares. Well, cool. By the way, thanks for your service. And West Point and Annapolis are the two schools that I wish I could have gotten into, and I did not. I didn't even apply because I wasn't a citizen, back then. But anyway, okay. So I think what we want to talk about is, and I think the way this came about, I think we're on Twitter talking back and forth about predictions. And I said, hey, I saw your predictions. I thought that a lot of them were interesting. Why don't you wait until you see mine? Let's get on, on Zoom. Let's get on one of these things and discuss them, So, but first, I'm going to pull up your website first. There we go, Hooquest. First of all, I just want to note that I love that you also did the kind of grading yourself on your 2021 predictions, which was great. And
it was unpleasant. Some of them I was just like, what was I thinking? That was just dumb. I really.
What's the one that you regret the most?
I mean, the 6% interest rate is just
this one. Yeah,
that would have been maybe the biggest. And ironically, that's one technically I got it right, but still, it was that's pretty. I don't know.
Yeah,
it was pretty aggressive. That was a bold prediction. Let's just say that.
Hey, like I said, all my predictions are guaranteed wrong or your money back. Unless you're a VIP subscriber, in which case, no. So I thought we would start with maybe both of our predictions.
Yeah.
And then discuss them. So let's go through your 2022 predictions. And you're saying you won't include easy predictions like Zillow launching a power buyer in 2022.
Yeah, so again, that's not inside information.
I was just going to ask. Yeah.
But and I'm not sharing anything, but I listened to the same earnings call that Rich Barton was on with everybody else, and he dropped some pretty strong hints that he believes Zillow 2.0 is still alive in some form, and the obvious form would be a power buyer. I know Mike Delpretti's talked about that as well, so I don't think that's not a surprise.
Sure.
If that comes down the pipe, I would be surprised if it doesn't.
All right. Yeah. So let's go through the first one. 2 power buyers join forces.
Yeah.
So tell us about this one. And by the way, all of this is available on Hooquest, which is your website. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And it's not
Yeah. So
Hood Quest. I did a lot
it's
of
not.
searching for Hood Quest.
Oh
Okay.
yeah. My Fort Hood site is the Hood Homes blog, but I started Hooquest just because I enjoyed my real estate website a lot, and I wanted
Yeah.
to just do some more on that on a national level, and that's how Hooquest came around. It's just a
Right
hobby
on.
site at the moment.
Right on.
Um,
Okay. So on
yeah.
Hooquest, two power buyers joined forces. Tell me about why you came up with this one.
So I remember Eric Wu talking about the iBuyer model and how he believes it's a winner take most, and
Right.
I believe the industry as a whole is headed in a winner take most direction. And we might talk more about that when we talk about FTC and things like that.
Sure.
But there's the reason I'm in Zillow and CoStar is because I think there's a race to be the ecosystem of real estate,
Mm-hmm.
and like Google and Amazon and all those other ecosystems of their respective industries, that's a winner take most. So
Right.
consolidation, I think, is the name of the game, and um, I think that applies to power buyers as well. And there's going to be a few of them now that there's quite a few in this space who calculate that teaming up forces is a way to become that, to leverage that scale,
Mm-hmm.
and get ahead of everybody else in that race.
So if you had to guess, which two do you think are the ones that will actually get together?
Oh, that's a good question that I should have had an answer for. I was thinking about that the other day.
Hey, again, out on the limb, predictions guaranteed wrong, right? So what do you think?
I mean, I feel like Knock and Easy Knock, just because the names just, I mean, everybody confuses them anyway, I'm guessing, to some
That's not a
extent.
bad point. Yeah. And I interviewed both of
Uh,
those guys, the CEOs.
yeah.
Knock and Easy.
That would be frustrating if I were either one of them, just how similar those names are.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe they'll
But not,
merge instead of like suing each other for trademark infringement or something.
yeah.
All right. So that's one.
Yeah.
Condo demand won't take off. This I thought was interesting. So, tell me about this one.
Yeah. So, and I mentioned at the end of my post, a lot of my predictions are that a lot of the trends that we're seeing sort of persist at least another year or two, versus what I'm reading in a lot of other predictions about a reversion to the mean and things like that.
Yeah.
This is in response to Redfin's own predictions about single family essentially had its year, and now it's
Yeah.
condos' turn to catch up.
Yeah.
I think that this whole trend hasn't played out. There's still buyers. The market's still relatively strong. There's still people taking advantage of the work from home stuff, and that
Yeah.
premium for single family is going to continue. Obviously, in that chart there, you saw in this last quarter, according to their numbers from Black Knight, single family took a big hit as a lot of markets, stopped appreciating as much as they
Yeah.
had earlier in the year. But already, I think we're seeing single family demand is strong and recovering from that.
So your
blip.
prediction essentially is single family prices will come back to earth, revert to the mean, right?
Single family, the pace of single family appreciation will outpace that of condo appreciation in 2022.
Gotcha. Okay, so if I'm an investor, I would rather have single family because the prices should go up faster than
Yes.
condo prices will.
Yes.
But they will both fall back to earth because this is what you mentioned. Condo appreciation surpassed SFH, single family houses. You think it's a blip. Single family falls back to earth, but trend will remain in favor of single family.
Correct. So my prediction is agnostic as to whether the market's up or down. I'm
Right.
just saying in any market, single
Right.
family is going to outperform
Outperform condos. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Your next one. Unemployment trickles up.
Yeah. So this isn't super real estate-y, but as I mentioned there, I just think inflation is going to put a lot of pressure on people's incomes.
Sure.
I think a lot of people aren't feeling that yet. There's obviously the consumer sentiment's not great, and I think a lot of people are anticipating that. But 2022 is when they'll actually start to feel it, and it'll affect some of their actual purchasing decisions. And and one of those will be people need more money.
Right. So this is
get
a
job.
technical prediction. In other words, you think people are going to go back to work, but
Yeah.
that means unemployment will go up simply because it's job seekers. So we're really
Correct.
talking about people who are on the sidelines, not actually looking for work, kind of coming back and looking for work, which will make unemployment rate blip up. But if you're right, then theoretically they should all get jobs and it'll come down. Right.
What should go down?
The unemployment rate should fall because they'll
So
actually
that's
get
why
employed. right?
That's why there was two parts of my prediction. I actually
Okay.
predicted the labor participation rate and the unemployment rate,
Okay.
and I think obviously a lot of those folks will get jobs,
Right.
but because of that, because of so many people returning, I think the unemployment rate will go back up too. Which I think I predicted 5.5%.
That's right.
Or something
So
like
labor
that.
force, labor force participation rate over 63, unemployment over 5.5.
Which that 63 is approximately what it was before COVID,
Right.
if I remember those charts offhand.
Right.
So
So
in
kind
that
of
sense, I guess it is a reversion to the pre-COVID mean
right.
of things getting back to normal and people realizing, all that stimulus money and stuff
Yep.
kind of runs out. And,
Yep.
and again, inflation putting that pressure. I think a lot of people are going to make their way back to looking for salaries.
All right. And then single family housing build to rent stocks skyrocket. So that this is a trend that I've been tracking for a while as well.
Yeah.
And I think we're kind of in agreement with this, but what do you have in mind here?
So that's interesting because one of your predictions is the federal single family investment ban,
Correct.
which if that came to pass, my prediction would look pretty shaky, I'm guessing.
But mine are
since-
guaranteed wrong. Don't forget. So
Yeah.
there's that. But basically, we're talking about these build to rent communities, and
Yeah.
I think Conroe, Texas, was the very first that D.R. Horton went and did, and a lot of builders are like really jumping on this bandwagon, which I think we'll discuss, at some length as to why. So you're expecting all of those guys to just, take off from a stock
Which, again,
standpoint.
technically they already have. Like 2021 was just a huge year for this model.
Yeah.
And again, I'm predicting that it maintains its momentum and becomes a major model of the future.
All right. And then finally, luxury housing continues upward.
Yep.
Okay, so I kind of agree. This is the base of a lot of my predictions. So this one a little bit as well. What were you thinking?
Yeah. So this and the unemployment predictions, of course, heavily tied to my inflation thesis of inflation benefits the rich, and it's going to make things easier for that. I mean, on the whole, it's not good for anybody. We'd prefer to not have an inflationary environment, I think, but
Right.
But to the extent it exists, the rich will benefit, and the trend again that we're seeing of these high income properties
Right.
will continue.
Right. And then
While
the one
everything else
where I
gets
think
shaky.
we're gonna, we're very different. DOJ v NAR is a nothing burger. So explain what your thinking is here.
Yeah, so this is related to your FTC prediction, but as you mentioned, that DOJ and FTC obviously aren't identical, the same thing. So it's possible that you're right and I'm right on both of these, maybe.
Right.
My main reason for this prediction is I read the complaint, and it was just an obnoxious complaint to me to read because it feels like they don't even understand the history of our industry.
Right.
And how these rules came about and how they're, pro-consumer in origin before it was sub-agency.
Right.
And the buyers had no fiduciary representation in the deal. And the evolution of cooperating commissions was to address that as a pro-consumer development in our industry. And then to suddenly say, oh, now our commissions are so high and it's going to be pro-consumer to eliminate that, to nuke it from orbit, essentially. It just shows a probably pretty typical kind of arrogance coming from the government about our industry and its history there. And I'm guessing somebody figures it out. And there's other reasons that it could be a nothing burger other than just common sense prevailing, in my opinion, in that NAR has, of course, filed I guess not technically a countersuit, but essentially a suit for specific performance, right? You bought the house, you need to buy it.
Yeah.
You talked about it a little bit. I don't know the merits of that law stuff. I'm not a lawyer. Don't
I think
have a law
zero.
background,
I think zero. There's like practically,
So on that, I actually have a quick question for you because you do have a legal background.
Yeah.
With respect to contracts, I mean, what's the consideration that DOJ gave NAR in to have that option of just withdrawing from the contract unilaterally entirely?
I think what
That
they
would
would
be an option
claim.
period.
Yeah, I think the claim would be that there were mutual promises. Right. In other words, NAR said, hey, we promise we're going to do these 4 things. And DOJ said, we promise not to investigate cooperation and compensation. And that was a deal. They had a contract, right?
Yeah.
And then
Which
NAR lived up
fulfilled
to
its side of it.
That's right. So, hey, the DOJ needs to fulfill its side.
Yeah.
The problem is, as I see it, there's a statutory requirement for 60 days of public comment, right?
Yeah.
The that statutory requirement makes no sense, right? If the settlement can't be set aside. In other words, it's a contingent promise, if you will, right? So really, there's no deal, right? All it is, and it's like, okay, you guys went ahead and did all these things in reliance on our promise, but that's you being stupid, right? Because the Department of Justice literally is not legally allowed to make that deal until the comment period's done, if that makes any sense.
Okay,
right?
Interesting.
So for the court,
even though they're backing out of the deal had nothing to do with the events of that comment period itself, they still
correct.
have the prerogative of doing that.
I think that's the way it would go. It's like, look, I mean, because otherwise, what's the point of a comment period, right? Because if the comment period comes and whatever the community, literally every citizen in the U.S. says, hell no, you're not doing this deal. And the DOJ says, well, sorry, we're bound because the other side performed. So we have to perform. Then the legislative, intent is completely frustrated. The courts aren't going to fine for that. So to me, like that lawsuit has done really nothing other than piss off the United States government even more than they already are. Which leads to a lot of mine. All right, so those are your predictions. Let's go through some of mine, and I'll read through. So this is my 7 predictions.
Yep.
And I suspect you might have some insider info on this or not, but my number 1 is Rich Barton retires again.
Yeah. I can say I do not. I actually never interacted directly with Rich Barton in my 2.5 years at Zillow. I certainly don't know his mind or the board's mind there. So
right.
This is one of your predictions I agree with, though, and it just makes sense.
I
came on the Zillow to do the Zillow offer thing, and now it's gone. So
what's the point? I mean, that's, to me, this is the one I feel most certain about, and all of them are guaranteed wrong. My number 2 prediction is that an explicitly conservative real estate brand launches, and it's just looking at just, the level of political division in our country right now. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. Let me move this a little bit. Number 3.
So that one I disagree with. Or did you want to go through them and then go and work through
them? Sure, why not? Tell me why you're disagreeing with this one.
So I wrote a few notes. I was curious about that. I looked into it. I looked into donations for president by political affiliation in the 2020 presidential race. Just filtered on a real estate broker.
Yeah.
And based on that, 55% of self-styled real estate brokers gave to Donald Trump.
Right.
And then the other 45% gave to Democrats. So my thesis being, there are a lot of conservative brokers already out there.
Sure.
It's the majority of brokers, even in conservative states, I would wager, or liberal states, I would wager.
Right.
There's plenty of options to choose from of brokers who share your political.
No, I agree. I think my take on it is individual agents and brokers. And I mean, you're in Texas, right?
Yeah.
I think other than the 3, maybe 4 urban metros, Texas is pretty red, right? And we see this play out in Texas, for example. You go up to like Dallas metro area, and you're in 2 different countries. You step out to Collin County, that is not the same thing as Dallas County. It's just not. I don't know what Killeen is like necessarily, but I'm willing to bet it's pretty different than Austin.
It is.
If you go 30
although,
minutes...
like in the Dallas markets, I mean, let's say there's no such thing as like a Dallas County agent. I mean, there may be, but I think most Dallas agents also service Collin County and Denton and
potentially. I mean, it's huge, so they might not travel as much, right? But again, so we could look at, say, Austin versus Pflugerville, or Austin versus Bastrop, or Austin versus Killeen. I'm willing to bet that the politics can be really, really different, right? So I agree with you in terms of the individual brokers and agents. My thing is, like, what brand are you with? What are you your own, or?
I'm with an independent brokerage.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my point is this, but at a brand level, there's no conservative brand in real estate, right? Like Coldwell Banker, Keller Williams, like the big actual brands. Now, on the flip side, you could say, well, everyone's like, those brands don't really matter. It's independent brokerages, they're the ones who really dominate local markets. You could make that argument, but I think the numbers say otherwise. Like EXP, 60,000 agents now? Keller Williams
Yeah.
has 150,000 or so. I mean, these brands really do matter. They hundreds of thousands of agents to belong to these brands. And my take on it is there is no explicitly conservative brand.
Would you describe all those as explicitly liberal or
No,
progressive? Or
no. I mean, I think they're apolitical. It's just that 2020, what it's forced a lot of these brands to do is to go and, I mean, I guess you have to say, they've had to genuflect to kind of the political winds of the times, right?
Part of your thesis was about the Huber case in particular, I think, right?
Exactly. And that's kind of what tipped me off to this, that fact that, Brandon Huber, who is one of my 7 most interesting people because, he's the pastor up in Montana who is currently suing the Realtor Association because he's being brought up under the NAR hate speech codes, right? He's like, nothing I did was hate speech, but that's a whole other topic. I didn't realize he belonged to Windermere. Or I did, and then Windermere, his brand, comes out with a statement basically condemning him, right? And then, donating money to the food bank that his church withdrew from, donating money to the LGBTQ Real Estate Alliance, things like that. I'm like, okay, so how long is Brandon going to be with that brand? How long is his broker going to be with that brand? And my thought was, not that long. Like it doesn't. Except that if I'm his broker and I'm looking around, okay, fine, I don't want to be with Windermere because their values don't reflect mine.
I was going to say, like, to date, it sounds like his broker has essentially stuck with him.
Correct.
To the best I've
Correct.
What I've read.
Correct. I mean, because otherwise, I think he'd be fired, right?
Yeah.
Like the very next day, I think what we'd hear is his broker saying this is unacceptable. He's out, right? I mean, we've seen this happen before when like some sort of racial incident happens. The broker is very swift, like, oh, you're out, you're fired,
Yeah.
But anyway, so when I was thinking about it, I just realized there is no explicitly conservative brand. And I'm saying explicitly conservative because I think in the rest of the economy, we see that. Like 511 Tactical, Black Rifle Coffee Company. There's these like weird, like niche brands that are trying to appeal to that audience.
So I wrote about that as well in my notes, thinking about it.
Yeah.
Those brands do exist, but I think they're qualitatively different than, say, a brokerage in that, the consumers who are buying Black Rifle Coffee or Ben and Jerry's ice cream, like, and they're doing it because of that political USP that they have. That's what. And imagine that loyalty is an extra $1 per coffee or
right.
For Democrat ice cream or whatever.
Right.
That's a really small cost versus that being the decision for your brokerage, whom you're going to give tens of thousands of dollars a year to. Suddenly signaling your political affiliation by buying Republican coffee or Democrat ice cream when it's a low cost, a brand can thrive on that USP, but I don't think it can thrive when when you have so much else going on that you're expecting from that experience.
That's interesting. Okay.
So that's one reason I'm skeptical of the prediction.
I was going the exact other way, right? Which was Black Rifle Coffee. I've had it. I actually have gone out and bought it, and it's coffee. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And it's more expensive than other coffee. So at that point, when the price is different or the quality is not the same, right? As an example, like 511 Tactical, I like their jeans, for bunches. I like their stuff for some things, but honestly, it doesn't. It's sort of lacking, behind some of the other sort of more mainstream brands, right? I felt like, and it's not the cheapest thing in the world. It really isn't. Or Vertex or some of these brands, they're kind of expensive compared to what I could go and get Levi's or, Lee jeans or whatever. So I thought in that case, because there's a difference to consumer, the politics would just get set aside, right? Versus in real estate, where you're right, it's tens of thousands of dollars, but it would be tens of thousands of dollars whether I used Black Rifle Realtors or, Rainbow Coalition realtors, right?
The marginal difference may be difference, yeah.
Yeah, the cost is the same, and from a quality standpoint, I don't think the brands reflect quality anyway. I think the individual agent does, right? So maybe I'm wrong there in the sense that if I know an agent and I feel like, oh, this agent's really great at selling houses for me, but they're opposed, like politically opposed, totally diametrically opposed, I say I don't give a crap, go sell my house, right? That's possible. So I could be dead wrong on this one. I just felt like, at the agent level, so that that's at the consumer level. The second level though is at the agent level. If I don't feel like there's a huge difference between Remax and Keller Williams and whatever brand, right? Because they all offer me the same thing, then maybe I would consider switching.
Yeah,
that was my thought. But you're right. It's an excellent point. I didn't think about that.
And the last point I'd make on that as well is, I don't. Let's say Brandon Huber is looking for a new brokerage soon. Imagine that's the case. He may already be, I'm guessing, but I doubt he's looking for an explicitly conservative brand versus one that'll just leave him alone on his.
True.
I doubt most people in that situation want the same thing, but in reverse, going the other way. I'm guessing they want a non-political brokerage environment where they're focused on the business model, and certainly the best agents, I'm guessing, would. And that's less a prediction about what will happen versus what I think should happen, in that I don't think brokerages should make politics
obviously
a core of their business.
Yeah. Obviously, it's kind of like the shut up and dribble, right? Like, I don't need to hear about politics from basketball players, but at the same time, it is what it is. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like at least over the last 2 years, I've seen more and more of where, unfortunately, these things become really important, again, on both sides. And, being an anarcho-capitalist myself, I have no tribe, right? I'm just kind of like, okay, that's fine. Both sides can ignore me or hate me, but it is just something I'm seeing. So I do think that it's getting more and more important, which is sad. It's unfortunate. It shouldn't be, and yet it is. So therefore, I mean, we already know there's going to be consumers and brokers. Let's put it differently. Let's say it's not Brandon Huber. Let's say it's some, really good, like full-time, 50 transactions a year agent who's out there saying, Trump 2024, January 6th was a hoax, like real right-wing type views. Would Wintermere hire him? Right, because the reverse also happens, right?
Maybe not, but then again, I think there's so many opportunities for someone even with those types of politics in our brokerage environment, in my opinion, that they wouldn't have a problem finding a home.
Yeah, so it would be neutral. But I guess what I'm looking at is I think there's an opportunity, right? So if I were one of these more politically right-wing brokerages, right, or brands, why not? Why not say, let me go get some franchise licenses and start franchising, right? And go out with some explicitly Christian message or explicitly conservative message, Imagine if Donald Trump started a brokerage, right? I mean, he's a real estate guy. I think he'd have 10,000 agents, by the end of next year, 15,000.
I guess we'll see, because he's got that social media something in the works at the moment, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean,
we'll see how sticky that is.
It's unfortunate. I just feel like the political leanings of brands is an important part of the marketing message now. And
based on one of the things you said, maybe what you're describing already exists to some level, because I know there are a lot of brokerages with explicitly Christian messaging and things like that.
There are?
I don't think they would. Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe not the big franchises that I can think of. If that's the premise, that some of these become franchise level stuff. But there's a lot of independent brokerages, obviously, with explicit Christian messaging, and that's a core part of their mission statement, where they're talking about God and things like that. So maybe your prediction is something of a greater scale than that. And,
maybe one of those guys.
I don't know who the biggest would be, but
maybe one of those guys goes and raises money and launches a national platform. That would. But so that was that prediction. All right, number 3, I have Open Door launching a FSBO service.
Yeah.
I know you had mentioned in our pre-show you disagree with 5 of my 7 predictions. This is one of the ones.
I think I do disagree with this one,
Okay.
but very lightly held opinion. You could
Lightly.
be right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, my take on it simply is Fizbo just seems like a real easy get. Just allowing people to Fizbo on your platform, and then you just pick up all the ancillary revenues. You have a shot if they fail at doing Fizbo to go and look, and you just spent whatever 90 days trying to do this on our platform. Why don't we just buy it off, take it off your hands, kind of deal. So it seemed like an obvious.
What's the main strategy of such a program? What's the main goal? Is it lead generation, or is it attracting people to a portal that Open Door has in order to earn web traffic because they have exclusive leads?
I think it's all of it. I think it's just a win. I don't see a downside for Open Door, right? Because unlike Zillow, like if Zillow had tried to do this, I think there would have been, a firestorm, right?
So that's the other. You mentioned what you described isn't necessarily a Fizbo portal, but an actual Fizbo service, essentially a limited service agreement type business model.
Right.
Which obviously Zillow has the portal, but they don't actually list Fizbos on the MLS.
Correct. Correct. Whereas Open Door, I think, could very easily do that, right?
Correct.
And Open Door does have its own portal, right?
Correct, but they only list their. Is it they only list their own homes?
I think it's an IDX website.
It does have IDX.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So and again, I think Open Door they've flown under the radar for so long, right? And from the beginning, they've made this habit of we're just gonna compensate everybody. We're gonna pay realtors like crazy. So I just don't get the same kind of hate, the visceral hate of Open Door that I get with Zillow. So I don't really see a downside for them. And I think it'll be a lead gen vehicle in terms of if I have Fizbo listings on my website, which, by the way, MLSs don't send those out over the IDX, right? So, like that actually ends up becoming exclusive inventory.
Yeah.
Right. And there might be some rules. I mean, I didn't delve real deep into it. But if it brings buyers to your website to take a look at this exclusive inventory, then that's good for Open Door. At the same time, it's lead gen in the sense of, look, some sellers I don't want to sell my house to you guys and get ripped off, right? But I also don't want to pay some agent 6% either. And we know there's whatever, is it like 3% now? That small percentage of people who are just going to Fizbo because they're just going to Fizbo. All right, well, then Open Door simply says, that's fine. Like, come list on our website and Fizbo all you want, right? Maybe it's not even a limited service agreement. Literally, it's just put it on my site.
The reason I'm cautious about that, I think it's possible, but if I were at Open Door, the types of questions I'd be asking about that and its implementation is they have a traditional listing service as well. We'll buy your house, and if you don't like our offer, Open Door will list your house.
Yeah, they're full service brokerage once you flip to that model.
And if the purpose of a Fizbo model is to maybe make a little bit of money on the service fees of selling that, and then but then the real is that the goal, or is the goal to upsell it to your traditional listing services and make the money that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of goal number one is right now only thing Open Door can do, right? So say somebody goes, okay, I'm maybe going to sell my house. All right, we'll buy your house from you. I'm not interested. Okay, we'll list your house for you. I'm not interested. Okay, well, thanks very much. Right? Why not say, okay, that's fine. Why don't you just Fizbo on our platform?
Yeah.
Right? It'll cost you nothing. But if you want us to come in...
Presumably it would cost something up front if Open Doors put in the effort of putting it in the MLS and things like that.
Yeah, I think you could just straight Fizbo, right? Yeah, and by the way, for $99, we'll put it in the MLS for you, right?
Okay.
Limited service agreement. Or it's entirely free. Just list it on opendoor.com, right? Because that way... You at least capture that info, right?
Yeah, if the upsell is essential to that model working or being having a sufficient ROI, the problem there I foresee is that you've got people engaging on the Fizbo platform with the goal of selling their house. That's the only reason they would list at Fizbo.
Sure.
And if they're serious enough to actually go through to try and make it happen, when that fails, it's Open Door who has failed them already. Like they tried to sell Fizbo with Open Door, it didn't work. How likely has that damaged the relationship at all? How likely are they going to stick with Open Door to to then upsell into a traditional thing, or are they going to say, no, we've had it listed for 3 months, y'all didn't sell it, even though obviously expectation wise that's not a reasonable expectation, because they're not getting the full listing marketing, but still they risk damaging their brand and their conversion on that upsell with the FSBO model. And then if they're essentially it's a limited service agreement already, why not, if that's the way they want to monetize it, why not just have that be the brokerage, as in a flat fee discount brokerage model for all of Open Door? If that's the way that they can make money and monetize, why have the differentiated products?
Because I think anybody who's going to FSBO in 2022, right? They're just going to FSBO. Like, they're not interested in working with an agent. They're not interested in selling, to an iBuyer. You know what I mean? Like, because I think most, and again, NAR has those stats, right? It's like 93 or 97% of people just go list with an agent. Right? Yeah. So it's that remaining 3% who just, they're DIYers, right? So they want to do it themselves. They think they're going to save a bunch of money. That's cool. Do whatever you want. We're just giving you this free website, essentially, right? Free platform to list your house. The thing is, the way I look at it is, it's capturing, leads or capturing business that you would not have gotten anyway. Okay, well, once you have that, then at least you have the opportunities to do things like upsell them some of the services. Like, hey, we understand your FSBO. You want to do everything yourself, but we do have this amazing ability, whatever. We have this capability if you want somebody to come in and, like clean up your house, right? Like lay down new carpet. We know how to do that because we have this huge iBuying division, right? Yeah. We'd be happy to do that for you for $900. We'd be, right? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there are some of these things that I think Open Door could just, and again, I feel like there's no downside really. Right? It's just because they've already spent the money, they already have the technology. Like, would you like some help pricing your home for sale? Because that's one of the biggest things that FSBOs struggle with, right? All right, look, we have this engine that prices homes for us. We'll let you use it for $20. Right? I mean, it seems like an easy, no-brainer thing. And oh, by the way, we have your email address. We know where you live. We know all those things. So if your property is just sitting there after 60 days, maybe we just give you a phone call, right? Because, I mean, agents calling FSBOs already, right? Like, I know there are scripts and there's coaches that are out there teaching, like, making phone calls to FSBOs. I mean, to me, this would be just the next level of it, where Open Door goes, you're on our website anyway, you're in our system anyway. It's not working for you. Why don't you just sell it to us? Right?
Yeah. So I think my final thesis on that is, and again, FSBOs are still a really small portion of the market.
Very small.
And if the main goal is to monetize it just as a FSBO business, I think the juice probably isn't worth the squeeze. Especially given that Open Door has so much else going on that they need to be thinking about. As far as
that's pretty much guaranteed to be wrong.
However, I like the idea of empowering FSBOs in general. I'm not slavishly devoted to the realtor traditional listing model. So I like the idea at a high level, but I doubt Open Door makes that decision in 2022.
No, you're probably right, but I'm making it anyway because who knows? Who knows what will happen? Number 4, FTC hands on first the big regulations.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one.
So you've been predicting government intervention for a while now.
I
think it's fair to say it hasn't happened yet.
Well, I mean, I would consider a lawsuit to be intervention. They haven't succeeded. Right.
If it were to happen, I think this is as good a time as any. I still disagree, and part of the reason I disagree is just because I'm trying to limit it. And you hedged your bets in the article a little bit, talking about it may come to fruition in 2023 or 24. I think just how long the process takes to play out. I don't think there's going to be meaningful progress in 2022 specifically. So as a 2022 prediction, I disagree that much is going to be made there.
You might be right, but look, the way I look at it is, the game with predictions always is you're much safer predicting that everything stays the same.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. But to the extent that like you and I are both like making predictions, this one here's my argument for why 2022, because the congressional elections are going to be huge. Right? This will be one of the biggest midterm elections coming up in November of this year. Well, housing is going to be a major political topic, I think, right? Which leads to some of my other at least one other prediction. And I could see the FTC, I could see Congress going to the FTC and say, do something, right? So I can support it and run on it.
Yeah.
Right?
Maybe.
But I don't think the FTC is ready to do. And again, the 4 ones that I had was eliminating cooperation compensation, eliminate clear cooperation policy, regulate data sharing, and eliminate the realtor requirement. There are certain reasons why I don't think 1 and 3 are going to happen this year, right, in 2022, because I think those are the ones that people are really going to fight. And I think they're going to need a little bit more research, a little bit more there, right? Whereas the number 2 and number 4, I think are easy ones for them, right?
So I have a question related to that.
Yeah.
Already, there's 4 states in which number 4 specifically, which
Yeah.
I think that's the most interesting one.
Yeah.
I think everybody would agree.
Yeah.
And the one that I'm personally most open to is that I think that would actually be a benefit to the industry. I'm not sure government forcing it is ideal, but
right. But that's an easy one for them to do, right?
There's 4 states where that's already effectively the case because of past litigation.
Correct.
Wouldn't we expect to see those benefits in those states already, at least at the margins, even?
No, not really. I mean, so in the Thompson states in California, the 4 states where you can't really require it, you still have. There are certain reasons why it doesn't happen. One is you have the NAR principal realtor rule, right? And a lot of the national franchises and national brokerages require that their agents be realtors, right? Because you can't have realtors in, say, Florida, Alabama, right? Thinking of the Thompson states, or Georgia, and realtors in North Carolina or some other state. Like, it's too difficult for that brokerage or that franchise to deal with all of that, right?
Yeah.
So they just go, you want to join Coldwell Banker, you got to be a realtor. Period. End of story. So that's one reason, and the other reason really is you get charged different prices to a point where you might as well join the association.
Got it.
Get more out of it, and then finally there are things like forms, right? Where it's like, fine, even if you can get realtor MLS access, you can't have form access. Right, because that's being published by the Realtor Association. Those are the areas where I think the FTC just comes in and goes, listen, we're going to make it even playing field. Right? You can't deny any of this stuff. You got to give it to everybody if they have a license. NAR and the associate will fight it. They'll go crazy. Right?
Surely that wouldn't be the case with forms and things like that, right?
Why?
You're saying that NAR would be forced to share its own proprietary forms with non-realtors?
Yeah.
Is there any other industry that does that? Like, is AMA? I don't know who else.
I don't know, but
like
if that's the case, then it would be real simple. So you're not allowed to use those forms. You have to use the state, provided forms.
Yeah.
Right. And
well, that's already the case. You have to use the state forms when they're available.
Yeah. But you could just simply mandate it. Like, you must use government forms. You cannot use private forms.
Okay.
And again, like, it's all regulatory overreach, all of it. But I mean, we live in a highly regulated world. We have the CDC telling people that they can't, evict tenants. Like, all right, well, if we're granting that kind of power to the government, then this one's like a no-brainer. Because here's how I look at it: NAR and the Realtor Association will obviously fight this, but literally no one else in the world will care. Like, consumers are not going to care. Like, could you imagine going to your consumers, your sphere of influence, and trying to get them riled up about, the FTC taking action on realtor requirement for MLS? Like,
that's why I also disagree with the political ramifications that you implied. Is that I don't think enough voters care in mass for that to become a big political football in November of 2022, especially given all the other likely contenders like Roe v. Wade. The Dobbs decision will be out by then, and its potential ramifications, and inflation, if it's still hot, is going to be a big issue. So I I think just as a voter salience issue, it's hard to predict anything that Congress
Correct.
wants to do.
Correct.
But I will say why I do think it's right. Why I think you could be right. And the new FTC chair, Lena Khan, I believe. Yeah. I was reading an article where her exact quote, or approximate quote, was that she isn't afraid of going too far.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like, and you were talking with Michael Werzer, I think, who was talking about the new Brandeis School of Antitrust and how it's catching on with FTC.
Yeah.
It's very clear to me that there's a lot of favorable trends under the Biden administration toward that type of regulatory, I would call it overreach potentially, but it depends on your political point of view.
Yeah, it's a new way of thinking about it. And look, I mean, I think in the political salience part, if I'm running for all I want to be able to say is I'm going up against the housing lobby. That's all I need to do, right? I'm not going to get into all this stuff. It's just I'm fighting for you, and these realtors are teaming up with big finance and whatever. And look, I mean, NAR is obviously going to fight that. They're not going to just sit there and take it. It's just we'll see what happens. And that actually leads to, I think, 5. I think this is kind of cute, but no one's really going to care. CoStar launches a MLS in the metaverse. Number 6, Realogy debuts property management business. Do you have opinions on either of those?
Yeah, metaverse. I've been reading your metaverse stuff, and honestly, I haven't been super engaged with it. Yeah. Even after Facebook's whole rebrand to Meta, it's like, okay. I disagree with that one, but my question, and this is a question for you. You know more than I've spent time with the MLS. I've been on 2 MLS committees. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, does CoStar need that much help in running an MLS? As in, is it that hard? The politics and the marketing and the lead gen and creating an MLS from scratch obviously is incredibly difficult. But the actual running of an MLS, you've got promulgated rules already you can just immediately adopt. You've got third-party vendors like CoreLogic and Black Knight who have that system you can just plug in fairly easily. It seems like the actual running of an MLS would be well within CoStar's skill set currently.
Probably.
Would it not?
Yeah, probably. But
if the rationale for a metaverse MLS is purely to get experience, it seems like they've got a lot of assets already under management that they could get that experience with.
No, you're probably right, and I think there's this is probably one that I'm not pinning my hopes on. Let's put it this way: it's not like I'm gonna go out and buy CoStar stock because I think they're definitely gonna launch a metaverse MLS, right?
The digital real estate
exactly
ecosystem.
My thought was they might want. Because commercial real estate and residential real estate is really, really different. Right? It's one of the things, I came up out of commercial real estate and I felt like culturally speaking, the two are not even the same thing. I would always say it's kind of like investment banks to community banks. They're both banks, but they're not the same thing. Not even close. And they sort of dislike each other in a similar way. Like residential agents don't really necessarily like commercial people, and commercial people certainly look down on residential agents, right? So I think if they're really going to make a play in this, it might not be a bad idea for them to at least start having to deal with thousands and thousands of residential real estate agents, right? Yeah. Even on just like a customer service type level, just to know, okay, this is what it's going to take in the real world, right? And what better place to get that practice than in the metaverse? It's not a real strong one of mine. And then
you should do a podcast with Sam DeBoard about what MLS fields would look like in a metaverse MLS.
That would be fascinating.
Update RESO.
That would be fascinating.
Have a feel for, does this house actually exist or not?
Right. That would be fascinating. Because, again, it's not a house, right? And because laws of physics don't apply, how do you describe that? I don't know if
I was trying to think, like, what would the fields even look like for something like that? What gives a house value? I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that, but it was interesting article to read.
And then the final one is what you mentioned, which is the federal ban on investment in single-family housing.
Oh, I was going to say that your Realogy property management is one I agree with.
Okay, right on. I think they should, right? I mean,
honestly,
it just makes sense.
I don't think I fully I mean, a lot of the franchise owners, they have property management wings, or they have separate companies that they may own or have affiliations with, where they send a
Not
lot of their
really.
business to.
A few, not a lot.
Okay.
That's actually one of my big things in 2022, to the extent that I'm going to be much more involved in sort of brokerage consulting side of things. I think my number one is you got to launch property management, right? That's why I talked about, I talked about that in my 7 most interesting people. It's just, yeah. I mean, again, that's probably a topic for a whole new thing.
That blows my mind. So, Killeen, Texas, being a military town,
Yeah.
the homeowners are 2/3 of Americans.
Mm-hmm.
But in Killeen, which is a military town, it's the ratio's flipped. So
Right.
2/3 are renters,
Right.
and everyone except for one of the major brokerages in my own market
Mm-hmm.
have property management.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to. That's a huge lead
That's
generation.
That's right.
It's 2/3 of all the real estate business is property management in our market. So it's a totally foreign concept to me to even hear about brokerages neglecting that part of their business.
And they won't, because one of the challenges that they have is the skill sets are so different. And the property management side,
Yeah.
it's all detail, it's all
Very
operations. It's, as Scott Brady, who's the guy I interviewed, it's turning nickels into dimes, versus sales,
Yeah.
which is glamorous and it's relationships and it's $10,000 commission checks, right? And it takes such a different mindset, and so it's really difficult, I think, for most brokers who come out of the sales side to get into property management.
And I've seen that dynamic firsthand. Being in a brokerage who has both the sales and property management,
Yeah.
that was my only possible caution. Is there a fear that could take the focus, the owner's focus, away from
Right.
the sales side of the business, and how
Right.
that'll affect your. I mean, you got all these brokerages that are living and dying by recruitment. You don't want
Right.
to do anything to piss off your.
Right.
your
So
top
it's
people.
but I think Scott Brady, who's the gentleman that I interviewed for this, and sort of talked about in my 7 most interesting, he's kind of figured that out, right?
Yeah.
I think he's kind of figured it out, and we'll see more and more, I think, emphasis placed into this, because fundamentally, I think one of my overriding kind of big trend thesis is that we're moving into renter nation, right? I don't think home ownership is going to break 50% for millennials. Well, they still have to live somewhere, which means there are going to be a lot more landlords, whether they are institutional landlords or individuals or individual investors. So all of those investors, unless they're self-managing, which a number of them are, but I don't know if you self-manage your properties, right? And you're a realtor. You know what I mean? Like, most people don't want to deal with that. Most people do not want to be answering phone calls at 3 a.m. Most people don't. So I think property management is just going to become more and more important, as we move forward. And then the challenge is, how do you run those two sides that are so different, right? Where one is all numbers and factual and being a pain in the ass, and the other is all emotional and relationships and aspirational, right? And that's going to be the difficult thing. So maybe it's just done through alliances or something else, but RESPA being what it is, I just think it's probably a lot easier to just bring it under one roof with separate divisions. That was my, and I thought Realogy were the guys to do it because they have this value circle thing. They've always had it. So
Well, your renter nation thesis somewhat conflicts with your last prediction.
it
That's not
doesn't.
far
It
back.
doesn't. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. I mean, I think we're headed to renter nation. My last thesis basically is that the federal government will ban institutional ownership of single-family residential. Right. And I think this will be the political issue of 2022. If they can't get it done in 22, then I suspect we'll see it by 24. Right. But I figure let's pull it forward and talk about it in 22, so I could be wrong on the timing.
And your hypothesis is that millennials and those who are priced out of the current market are
Correct.
going to become politically active to make this happen.
I think it's just something I'm picking up a little bit more. Like I said, I spent a bunch of time on YouTube looking at some of these like economy, crypto, housing, a lot of these videos. And what I'm seeing is the comments and the level of anger that's out there now is actually a little bit frightening. Again, I don't know what it's like in your market, because you're a military town, maybe it's a little different, but so many of these kids that that graduated, and let's face it, like they're not kids anymore. Millennials are 40. You know what I mean? They're not kids. And they're like, we can't afford houses. And I think it's a very simple reason, because home prices are up 20% year over year. Wages aren't up 20% year over year. And if anything, over the last 2 or 3 decades, wages are flat. Housing went up and to the right. So, we're sort of papering it over, and we've been dealing with it basically by making mortgages super cheap and making liquidity available all over the place. Yeah, except that once inflation gets past a certain point, and a lot of rich people just go, yeah, I'm not, screw bonds. I need to buy real estate. And I think that's what we're seeing. And I think that's what we saw in 2020. I think that's what we saw in 2021. We're going to see more of it in 2022. And you're right. It's what you pointed out in your prediction about single family housing. Inflation hurts the poor and the middle class. The rich, it hurts them, but they can hedge against it by buying assets. So they're going to buy real estate.
Yeah.
That's the big take on it. But it becomes a political issue. And in order to deal with that, I think Congress likely does something that says, listen, we're going to keep the Wall Street landlords out of single family houses. Right? If they want to invest in apartment buildings, that's fine, because that's not something where individuals they're not, that's not the American dream, right? Like the American dream is not 2-bedroom condo. The American dream is 3-bedroom house with a yard and a fence. I think that's what they're going to do. And it'll be, I don't know. That's my take. What do you think?
So I forget her name. You wrote about her recently.
Ivy Zellman.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Predicting an implosion of buyer demand.
That's right.
It would be very ironic if Congress added to those pressures by also eliminating the institutional demand for houses.
Yep.
And if the goal is to make housing more affordable, that would seem to do the trick.
It would do the trick. I mean, it would hurt the owners, right?
My regardless of what should happen, talking just about predictions and would, the reason I disagree with this is the majority of Americans are still homeowners. It's still about 63%.
That's right.
That's down from the high, but versus the last 10 years, that's still it's still fairly high.
Yeah, but most of that is concentrated with boomers and Gen X.
Correct.
Millennials are below 50%. In fact, I think they're like, I know I posted this. It was like 42, 43%, something like that.
I just had the numbers up.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that Gen X and your boomers are your voters disproportionately. Millennials still don't vote at the same, and Zoomers especially don't vote in the same proportion or turn out in the same proportion as those generations do. So that all the political power is still with homeowners.
So on a percentage basis. But here's the thing. I mean, simply because boomers are dying off and millennials are the largest bump. They're the python. They're the pig moving through the python. They are the largest generation we've ever had. And more of them are becoming politically active. Like I said, the oldest millennials are 40.
Yeah.
They're not kids anymore. They have families, And I think if we looked at, say, the Canadian elections, it's there's no question in my mind millennials have had a huge impact on that.
The demographic changes as a whole, though, I think everybody's aging over time. I mean, the boomers are dying off, but not very quickly.
Right. Well.
And with modern medicine, our lifespan. Obviously, the opioid crisis has impacted folks, but I don't think it's impacted the tail end of our boomer and silent generations as much. And I think that their power as a voting bloc is still as high or higher than it's ever been. And that's why I think, again, those homeowners, they're not going to tolerate dropping home prices.
I mean, it's possible. We'll see. I mean, if I'm a politician, all I care about is counting the votes, right?
Yeah.
Like, I could say, yeah, the homeowners are going to vote against me, but renters are going to vote for me. Right now, homeowners in numbers is theory. There are more of them. There are renters. I don't know if that's true in 2022.
Yeah.
And again, it also depends on where I'm running from. Right, and what my district looks like. If I'm running from a rural district in Kansas, maybe I just I got to go with homeowners because everybody, owns their family farm. If I'm running from Austin, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be going after the renter vote. You know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe.
Like, that's a safe bet. For that matter,
getting away from the will to the should, anyone who thinks that way, I would argue that banning that kind of investment is really shooting themselves in the foot. I mean, in my article, I mentioned how American Homes for Rent has completely pivoted from buying existing homes into just being a home builder. I don't,
right.
There might be a carve out in whatever perceived legislation you have in mind for someone who's actually building the homes,
right.
The inventory. But a lot of this money is actually going into producing housing inventory at this point, because they recognize that there's that shortage and there's money to be made by fixing that issue. Yeah. So hopefully that doesn't come to pass.
The way I look at it is like if we could pretty much count on politicians to do the absolute worst possible thing.
Yeah, and which is why getting back to the DOJ and the FTC type stuff, some of the stuff kind of makes sense to me. Even the stuff that NAR agreed to, all of that. Okay, modifying the code of ethics so that you can't say anything's free anymore. I kind of get that, but then there's just these little clues that to me suggest they don't quite understand the industry, and any forthcoming regulation I'm pretty nervous about if that does come to play in 2022. And
I think it's right to
a lot
be
of
nervous.
unintended consequences
of course it's right to be nervous. I mean, my thesis on regulation as a whole and government action as a whole really is that they prefer to use chainsaws, right, when a scalpel would be a much better thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Because again, none of these regulators really understand the industry. Now, on the flip side, I think the mistake that we make as an industry is think that these regulators are stupid. They're not stupid. They're really smart people. They're just, they're just not in the industry. But they're fast learners, and then it becomes a matter of who do they listen to. And some of these like subtle, scalpel precision type things, it's hard to implement those in terms of regulations. It's much easier for a regulator just go, listen, you're going to allow commingling. That's just easier for them to do. It's just easier for them to say, you're not allowed to share commissions anymore. It will create unintended consequences, no doubt, because every regulation ever promulgated created unintended consequences. But that's what they're going to do, right? So I figure the same thing here. It's headlines, it's political slogans, right? It's not trying to go talk to people about, look, supply demand curves and lack of inventory, and here's why, and like nobody's going to listen to that. Versus, I'm fighting Wall Street for you. Like that's a much better campaign stump speech, which is why I'm thinking this is likely what's going to happen. So, let me get rid of this. We've already talked for almost an hour. What do you think is, what's your number one biggest prediction for 2022?
Oh, let me look at my notes here. Well, so looking bigger picture, I mean, the original Twitter conversation you and I had wasn't about your predictions necessarily. It was about one of your articles where you're talking about changing to futurism, things like that.
Yeah.
And I was just surprised by how it wasn't necessarily explicitly negative, but it came off as kind of negative. If I were an agent doing 20 deals a year or something like that, start trying to grow my business and things like that, it would have made me feel pretty nervous.
I think agents should be pretty nervous. I think there's a massive disruption coming, and I think most brokers aren't ready for them.
Yeah.
Right. And the question then becomes, and this is where the predictions come in, maybe I'm totally wrong about these disruptions, right? But I definitely do think that within the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to be in a post-compensation world, right? And we're likely going to be in a post-commission world, right? So how many people are ready for that? I'd argue very few, right? And one of the reasons why I'm talking about this futuristic stuff is, at a minimum, you should be prepped. Right. So when I lived in Houston, I would talk about it all the time. Look, I mean, hurricanes happen. We need to have water. We need to have food. We need to have, ammo. We need to have certain things in the house. And people are you're crazy. And then we see it every time it happens. Austin had a freeze, right?
Yep.
Freaking Austin had a freeze,
Yep.
and you see
I was
these
here for that.
lines. I mean, and you see these lines, like a mile long outside the grocery store. I'm like,
My wife makes fun of me for how many blankets I have.
yeah,
Because we live in Texas,
yeah.
and sure enough, they came in handy.
They came in handy.
Came in
And
handy in
so
February.
to me, it's kind of like that. Look, I mean, maybe you think none of these things are going to happen as an agent, as a broker, right? My take is you should at least have some plans in place, right?
With
So,
regard to the regulatory dangers, so to speak, I mean that plan would essentially be the reason I'm more positive is I think the answer to a lot of these things is to do a lot of things that good agents are already doing. So good agents who are doing the right things aren't going to see their routines disrupted that much. Aren't going to see
sure.
things that what worked. What's worked in 2020, I think, is going to work in 2030. Is basically how I feel about it. Things may change.
What are you talking about, though, when you say that, right? So, as an example, what I'm saying is if cooperating compensation goes away,
Yeah,
you have to convince your buyer to pay you.
correct. But already, for example, we have the mantra "list to last." Like
Sure.
that's already
Sure.
a big priority. There's only a few people who make their business model exclusively on buyers agents, and I guess
Sure.
Zillow, for example, is one of those, or some of the portals who make it off of buyer commissions.
Right.
They have some existential potential issues if that regulatory future comes true. But I think for most of your top producing agents who half their business is on referrals, more than half are listings and things like that.
See, I don't think that's true because I've looked at a lot of numbers of some of these top agent teams, and it's still 1/3, 2/3. There's 1/3 of their revenues come from listing, but 2/3 comes from representing buyers, right? And frankly, a lot of it is because when you have a listing, right, only one buyer can buy that listing.
Yeah.
But you're going to generate 26 inquiries, and if you're a good agent, you're going to convert 3 or 4 of them, right?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, that house. Let me show you that house, right? We look at it. You're not in love with it, but on the way, you learned a little bit about that buyer, their family situation, whatever. Go, there are 4 other houses I could show you that might meet your criteria. And again, if you're good at your job, if you're a good realtor, you probably earn their trust and go, yeah, okay, let's go see some of those other houses. So that's what I've seen, right? That's what the numbers suggest. So you're right. I think it is list to last. But if you look at the actual revenues, it's still 1/3, 2/3. On average, it could be as high as 50-50. But buy side is a big chunk of the business. And the question becomes, how do you convince your buyer to pay you? And when I talk about being prepped, it's like, I don't know that agents are thinking about that. I don't know if they're practicing. I don't know if they're, even contemplating, okay, if this happens, not that it's going to happen, but if it happens, how do I then, I'm not going to change the fundamentals. I agree with you there. Like fundamentals are still sphere. It's still relationships. It's still all those things. But you could have all the sphere and relationship you want. You still have to convince someone to pay you that you didn't have to before. You're going to have to come up with that, right?
If the FTC literally just turns a knob and says you're no longer allowed to advertise or even give cooperating commissions to buyers agents, and buyers have to show up to closing with a check for your services,
or we don't care how they do it, right?
That would be pretty disruptive.
Yeah, it would be, and which is why I don't see that happening next year, but I do see.
Although I will mention, one of my recent deals was the first time I had a buyer pay me on a FSBO transaction, and I explained to them that it was the first time I've ever had that happen. Obviously, I've showed FSBOs in the past, but I explained like they're not offering a commission. My buyer's agreement says that I will try to get it from them, but failing that, it'll come from your side. And sure enough, that's how it happened at the closing table. So it's possible.
It's possible. But, and here's the thing. I think people think that I'm somehow knocking buyer agents. Like, no, I use buyer agents every time I bought a house. And I think the right buyer agent is incredibly valuable, right? I think my take on things, and it has been for a few years, is I actually think agents should just get paid by the hour, right? Because that very quickly then starts to filter out who the really great buyer agents are, who aren't, right? Because honestly, I've had these buyer agents as well, right? Somebody who just like drives you to a house and opens the door, like there's very little value in that. I'm sorry, there really isn't much value. But a buyer agent who really knows the neighborhood, knows the area, could tell me which side of the road floods, when it rains, Like when we bought our place up in Utah, I talked about this. We had this buyer agent who knew like the slope of the hill and what that's going to mean when it snows. I'm like, okay, you have earned every dime. I would pay that guy an hourly rate just to advise me. Hey, is this price reasonable to you, right? So that's
I think what the FTC has to think about then in that circumstance is there are people who are willing to pay out of pocket for things like that. But again, my being in a military community where the VA is 100% loan, and it's common to get your closing costs covered. For most of my real estate career, buyers literally get their earnest money back at closing. They get paid to buy a house, essentially. Obviously, it's money that they gave at the beginning of the transaction, but to even add any sort of friction to that would eliminate a lot of VA buyers in that circumstance.
I mean, who knows? Like the military and the VA side is one that obviously I'm not familiar because I've never served. I'm not part of that. But it occurs to me like the VA has a whole separate health system.
Yeah.
Right. What would stop the VA from having a whole separate realtor system? Just hire real estate agents.
I'm sure if FTC came out with stuff like that, there would be I don't know if it'd be simultaneous, but the talk about FHFA changing the rules to allow Fannie and Freddie to roll in commissions into the loan and things like that. Because I think just blanket, what you're harming your lowest income buyers who can't afford those types of services out of pocket, and consequently they're treated like customers instead of clients. And that's what I'm afraid the FTC isn't thinking about.
I've heard that as well, and NAR talks about that. And my issue is, okay, the people that are the lowest income potential buyers, right? Two things about that. One, they're still buyers, right? In other words, they're still at some level of financial health that they're thinking about buying a house instead of just renting or Section 8 housing. In other words, like somebody who's like really in dire straits is eligible for low income Section 8 housing. They're not going to be buyers anytime soon. It's just not, or ever, right? It's just not going to happen, right? So talking about them in terms of being a buyer is just I don't even see that being a factor, right? So what we're really talking about is sort of working class, blue collar families, maybe military families, who they're not like, in dire straits, but they're certainly not rolling in it, and they want to buy a home because it's, security, it's, growing wealth, etc. We're talking about that small group of people. And if the idea is like they need to be able to roll their loan, their commission into the loan, those are the people who have the most trouble with LTV. Those are the people who have the most trouble with low interest rates and so on and so forth because their credit's not going to be as good. So who knows, like they'll do the worst thing possible, but almost feels like the better way would be to just have, public realtors. Right. In other words, have realtors on payroll of the government who are paid to represent those buyers. And I think the VA would be the organization I think would maybe pioneer that, right? So in, communities where you have large, armed forces presence, like Killeen, like some of the Fort Bragg, like some of these areas, maybe just go, listen, we're just gonna start a company.
Well, that does remind me. You're talking about that future of a hourly agent. That does remind me of the Open Door model, where my understanding is that they hire an agent who they take a 88% referral fee or something like that.
8% or 80?
88%.
88? Oh.
88%.
Yeah.
And that agent advises the buyers for a couple hours. Does, I think, 5 to 15 of those a week. And when you do the math, that's like $350,000 gross commission on an 88% referral fee. Open Door is getting a local expert to advise their buyers on their transactions with a fiduciary responsibility to that buyer.
Yeah.
So the buyer is benefiting from representation.
Yeah.
The agent still making 6 figures and then some.
Yeah.
And that's despite making only a tiny fraction. It's essentially the hourly model.
Yeah. And in theory, you have like Redfin, that's kind of a salary plus like a huge bonus. Zillow offers, that I know they were using employed agents, right?
I don't believe Zillow was representing the buyer on.
No, they weren't. But to the extent that they were representing they were employees. It totally could work, right? It's just there's no incentive for it to work today. My point is, I think when some of these things happen, it will work. And again, like I think what I've been saying for the last few years is just get ready. That's all. I'm not saying pivot your business. I'm not saying, oh, I don't take commissions. No, no, no. Like just have some plan ready. If this were to come down, here's what I'm going to do. Right?
Yeah.
And that could mean things like, I know you're very involved in the tech space for real estate tech. Maybe it's just, taking a look at your accounting software and be like, hey, is there an option to do hourly or flat fee? Right. And if there isn't, maybe you contact your vendor and say, hey, listen, can you give me an hourly or flat fee option? Right. So that if I have to pivot, I don't have to switch out the entire tech platform. I just turn on, that option. It's things like that. And again, I think people in our industry, man, they get so worked up about stuff. It's like, look, it's not an assault on your entire livelihood or, saying you're useless. It's just pointing out like these are the trends that's happening and you're not ready. Maybe you should get ready. That's all, and that's why the pivot for me is I feel like I spent 11 years like, hammering away at these things. And at some point it just gets annoying, right? At some point it's like, all right, it's time to move on past the next 12 months and look at what's coming down the pike 3 to 5 years out. And then it's stuff that people can disagree with much more vigorously, like metaverse and crypto and, whatever, sovereign individual and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I feel like with those changes, even if there's agent compression and commission compression and all these things, that Pareto principle where you have 10% of the top agents doing 90% of the deals, it doesn't take a lot to get into that top 10%. That's not a lot of transactions per year. So I'm thinking again about that agent doing 20 deals a year. I feel like they're in a good position if they're continue doing their lead generating. Obviously, you want to be diversified between buyers and sellers. But I think a lot of those, the follow-up, the building personal relationships and all the stuff that's sort of in vogue right now with real estate training, I think that will all be effective in surviving whatever disruption is coming, and again will still be in effect. Maybe it'll look different, but those basic principles I think will still be valid in 2030.
Yeah, no, I think that's generally right. The only thing to keep in mind though is we think the Pareto principle is, you just said 90-10. For the longest time, the Pareto principle is 80-20.
Yeah, I think it's probably closer to 90-10.
It's probably close to 90-10. And the question is this, why? What changed where Pareto is 90-10?
I feel like for our industry specifically, it's just all the incentives are in favor of having more agents versus fewer higher quality agents.
So you think it's just that the denominator has gotten larger?
Correct. I think there's just a lot of
sure.
That plus the licensing environment requires people to have agents who don't even want to do deals. If I just want to refer business out, I still have to have a license in order to collect a referral fee in Texas. So there's a few different things that I think could skew that Pareto principle that are relatively innocuous.
Whereas I think what I would argue is that it's because of technology. Right?
Yeah.
In other words, there was a time when like doing 50 deals a year would have been impossible.
Yeah.
Or you're working, 16 hours a day, you're working like a crazy dog, right? Whereas today, with the technology we have today, and I mentioned this because through Hooquest, you do a lot of stuff with real estate tech. 50 is like not that impossible.
Yeah.
So the way I look at it is as technology continues to get better and better and advance more and more and more, well, like why not 100? Right. And that's like without pushing yourself that hard because you have AI assistants and whatever and, virtual tours, all that kind of stuff. Okay. Well, if
I know we're over time. That might be a totally separate conversation.
Totally separate conversation.
Your article about the deflationary effect of technology, I thought was really interesting. Exactly. I don't think it's necessarily has to be deflationary because you see lots of business and industries who have experienced that technological disruption. What they do is their value offering just expands.
Sure.
To justify the price.
Sure.
One example is Walmart. I was just thinking about this the other day. We were picking up our groceries.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1990s, if you said I'd have a personal shopper, I'd be like, oh, I must be rich in the future, whenever this. But no, that's just their basic business model because they've automated so much of the customer experience. Half of the cashiers are now self checkout.
That's right.
The Walmart they just built around the corner.
That's
And
right.
now, for almost nothing, I can afford to just pull up and all that the resources pivot so that they're still giving me more value for my
That's right.
money rather than just cutting
That's right.
costs on me. So I think the technology is deflationary, but what brokers should be thinking about, in my opinion, is how do you continue to move up the value chain and add more value to these transactions that your
Absolutely.
customers are already getting.
Absolutely. And it's the same thing,
Yeah,
like, anti-lock brakes, four-wheel steering, all these things were once the
yeah,
province of supercars that cost
yeah.
$300,000. Now you could get them in a Honda, you know. So technology is deflationary, but in our
Houses
industry,
themselves, like technology has made houses far better, and we actually
sure.
spend more of our income on housing than we did in 1950. That's because we get so much more for our money. Uh,
I don't know if I
I
agree
mean,
with that, but that's a whole other topic
I mean,
because,
just literally like the square footage per person, per capita square footage is
yeah.
just exploding, especially with the shrinking family formation.
Yeah,
And then
but we're
even
not,
this house
yeah.
here I bought over the summer. This was built in 2000.
Yeah.
And being a realtor, I've been in a lot of new construction homes built in 2015, and there's all these little things I can tell aren't best practices
Yeah.
anymore in
Yeah.
building homes because the home building industry has come so far in just 20 years. You get more
Yeah.
for your money.
I think we'd have to take some inflation into account to say that because I don't know if that's true. But
Maybe.
that's a whole other topic, and we are way over time, and maybe we
Yeah.
should schedule another one to talk about that specific thing. I'd be real
Yeah.
curious
I
because
liked your article on that. I've been
yeah,
thinking about
because
that a lot.
when you look at 1950s versus what you got for your money in 1950, yeah, but the
Yeah.
money was worth a lot more. So, right, we'd have
That's
to actually talk
true.
about the money.
And it's hard to disentangle that. But I'm
Correct.
thinking it mostly in terms of what portion of our income do we spend on housing. And that
Yeah,
is higher than
it's
it
way
was in
higher. But how
1950.
much is because housing went like this and wages stayed like that?
I think part of it is other technologies like food. We used to spend a lot more on food,
Hmm.
40% of our income on food, and now it's less than 10%, I think.
Yeah.
So it's just priorities of where we spend our money going into different
Oh,
areas.
no doubt. No
Uh,
doubt.
and I don't know, commissions isn't necessarily one of those where
Yeah.
maybe the value add is shrinking commissions
Yeah.
to
So.
consumers, but it doesn't have to be.
So we shall see. All right. Well, like I said, this was an interesting first one. We just wanted to talk about our respective predictions,
Yeah,
and I appreciate your disagreement, but in a nice, friendly
yeah.
way, right? Not like you're an idiot. That's what's kind of wrong with our society. There's too many people yelling at each other instead of just having
I,
conversations and
I
disagreeing.
am on Twitter. I can do that too. I've got lots of practice calling people idiots if that's what you want.
Awesome. Hey, thanks very much for taking the time, Brian. If people want to find you, how do they reach you? What's the best
Yeah,
way?
so Hooquest is my site. I do product reviews and some how-to articles and things
Hmm.
like that. It's just a side project for now,
Yep.
but I'm trying to grow it into something more, and I've enjoyed it along the way, just doing it on my free time.
Right on. Right
Yeah,
on. And you said you're on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
Hooquest. Yeah,
At Hooquest.
at Hooquest.
All right. Well, thanks very much. And hey, for anyone who stuck through this 90-minute conversation, we appreciate you. I'd be amazed. But thanks very much. And we will see you next time.